Jake Morrison opened his eyes and saw nothing but darkness at first. His head pounded with pain that felt like hammers hitting his skull from the inside. Slowly, the darkness faded and shapes began to form around him. He was lying on cold stone floor in a massive hall made entirely of crystal. The walls shimmered with colors he had never seen before, and the ceiling rose so high above him that he could barely see where it ended. His wrists hurt, and when he looked down, he saw heavy metal chains locked around them. The chains glowed with a faint blue light that made his skin tingle in an unpleasant way. Jake tried to remember how he got here, but his memories were fuzzy and broken. He remembered the colony on the frontier world. He remembered the refugees who needed protection from the alien raiders. He remembered his squad of 7 soldiers who fought beside him. Then he remembered the attack. The Velthari had come from the sky on massive dragons that breathed fire and lightning. His squad fought hard, but they were no match for the alien warriors and their bonded beasts. One by one, his friends fell until only Jake remained standing. He had killed 12 of the alien soldiers before something hit him from behind. Everything went black after that. Now he was here in this crystal prison far from home. Footsteps echoed through the hall, and Jake looked up to see figures approaching. They were tall and elegant, with skin that seemed to glow with inner light. Their eyes were large and slanted, and came in colors that humans did not have. Silver hair flowed down their backs like waterfalls of moonlight. These were the Velthari, and they were his captors now. At the front of the group walked a female who was clearly important. She wore robes of deep purple that shifted colors as she moved. Her hair was pure silver, and her eyes were violet like twin amethysts. On her shoulder sat a small creature that looked like a miniature dragon. But Jake knew from intel reports that this was just a projection. The real dragon was somewhere else much larger and far more dangerous. The female stopped 10 feet away from Jake and studied him with those strange violet eyes. She tilted her head slightly as if trying to understand something about him that confused her. Jake glared back at her and refused to look away first. He would not show weakness to these aliens no matter what they did to him. Behind the female stood more Velthari in armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, and their hands rested on the grips ready to draw at any moment. One of them was a stern-looking female with short black hair and eyes like chips of ice. She wore the insignia of a general and watched Jake with obvious disgust. Another was an older female with elaborate robes and jewelry who kept whispering to the princess. Her expression was one of barely concealed anger. The princess in purple finally spoke, and her voice was like music, even though Jake hated to admit it. She spoke in the Velthari language, but somehow Jake understood every word. That should have been impossible, but he was too tired and hurt to question it right now. She asked him his name and where he came from. Jake said nothing and just stared at her with defiance. The general stepped forward and raised her hand. Energy crackled around her fingers, and Jake knew she was about to hurt him. But the princess held up one hand, and the general stopped. The princess asked again, but Jake remained silent. They wanted information about human defenses and colony locations. They wanted to know about Earth and how many ships humanity had. Jake would die before he told them anything. For 3 hours they questioned him. Sometimes they used gentle voices and sometimes they used threats. The general wanted to use force, but the princess kept stopping her. The older female in the fancy robes argued with the princess in harsh whispers. Jake caught words like abomination and weakness and human filth. Finally, the princess seemed to tire of the questions. She gave an order, and guards came forward to drag Jake to his feet. They took him through hallways of crystal that bent light into rainbow patterns. Other Velthari stopped to stare at him as he passed. Some looked curious, but most looked at him with hatred or fear. They brought him to a large courtyard where hundreds of Velthari had gathered. In the center of the courtyard was a platform with a stone block. Jake understood immediately what this was. An execution ground. The guards forced him to his knees in front of the block. The crowd whispered and pointed at him. The princess walked onto the platform, followed by her advisors. She began to speak to the crowd about justice and protection of the empire. She said that Jake was a human soldier who had killed many Velthari warriors. She said that he refused to give information that could save lives. She said that the law demanded his death. The crowd cheered and called for his blood. Jake felt fear creep into his heart, but he pushed it down. He had known this might happen when he joined the Colonial Defense Force. At least he had protected those refugees. At least his squad died as heroes. The general drew a long, curved blade that glowed with blue fire. She stepped toward Jake with cold satisfaction in her eyes. But Jake was not ready to die yet. As the general raised the blade, Jake moved. The chains on his wrists were strong, but the posts they were attached to were not part of the stone. He yanked hard and felt something give way. His hands came free, still bound together but no longer anchored. Jake threw himself sideways as the blade came down. It struck stone where his neck had been a moment before. Sparks flew, and the crowd gasped. Jake rolled to his feet and grabbed the chain between his wrists. He swung it like a weapon and caught a guard across the face. The guard went down hard. Another guard rushed at Jake, but he was ready. He ducked under the grab and brought the chain down on the back of the guard neck. Two more guards came at him together. Jake kicked one in the knee and heard something crack. The guard screamed and fell. He wrapped the chain around the other guard throat and pulled tight. The guard clawed at the chain but could not break free. Jake dropped him and grabbed the fallen guard weapon. It was a rod that crackled with energy. He did not know how it worked, but he pointed it at the approaching soldiers and pressed what looked like a trigger. Lightning burst from the rod and sent 3 guards flying backward. The crowd was screaming now. Some ran for the exits, while others called for more guards. Jake fought like a wild animal. He had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Pride in his species and refusal to go quietly into death. He took down guard after guard using their own weapons against them. The courtyard became a battlefield, but there were too many of them. Even as Jake fought, he knew he could not win. Then the sky darkened. A shadow fell over the courtyard so large that it blotted out the sun. Jake looked up and saw death coming for him. The dragon was massive beyond belief. Its scales were black as midnight and gleamed like polished obsidian. Its eyes burned with ancient intelligence. Its wings stretched wider than any ship Jake had ever seen. This was Corvash, and he belonged to the princess. The dragon descended into the courtyard, and guards scattered in every direction. Its talons were longer than Jake was tall. Its teeth could bite him in half without effort. Jake stood his ground and raised the weapon he had stolen. If he was going to die, he would die facing his enemy. The dragon lowered its massive head until one eye was level with Jake. That eye studied him with an intelligence that made Jake shiver. It was not the mindless beast he had expected. This creature was ancient and wise and far more dangerous than any weapon. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then the dragon did something unexpected. It did not kill Jake. Instead, it made a low rumbling sound deep in its chest. The princess ran forward and placed her hand on the dragon's massive jaw. She looked at Jake with those violet eyes. Her expression was one of shock and confusion and something else, something that might have been recognition. Jake swayed on his feet as blood ran down his side from wounds he had not noticed before. His vision blurred and his knees buckled. As he fell forward onto the stone, he heard the princess speak. Her voice cut through the chaos and silenced the entire courtyard. She said words that Jake did not understand at first. Words that would change everything. He belongs to me. The crowd erupted in protest, but the princess did not waver. The dragon Corvash rumbled again, and this time it sounded like agreement. As darkness claimed Jake again, he wondered what those words meant. He wondered why the dragon had not killed him. He wondered why the princess had claimed him. But most of all, he wondered if this was better or worse than death. The last thing he saw was the Princess Violet eyes watching him. The last thing he felt was the strange warmth of dragon breath on his face. Then nothing. Jake woke to softness beneath him instead of cold stone. His eyes opened slowly, and he found himself in a room unlike any he had seen before. The walls were made of something between crystal and pearl that glowed with gentle light. Silk curtains hung from the ceiling in colors of deep blue and silver. He was lying on a bed that felt like floating on clouds. His wounds had been bandaged, and he could feel the tingling of healing magic working on his injuries. For a moment, Jake wondered if he had died, and this was some kind of afterlife. But the pain in his ribs told him he was still very much alive. He tried to sit up, but his body protested with sharp pains. A voice spoke from the shadows, and Jake tensed. The princess stepped into the light, and Jake saw her clearly for the first time without the chaos of battle. She was beautiful in a way that was both alien and familiar. Her silver hair fell to her waist in waves that seemed to move on. Their own. Her violet eyes held depths that reminded Jake of the ocean at night. Her skin had a faint luminescence like she carried starlight under her flesh. She wore simple robes now instead of the formal dress from before. She carried a bowl of water and clean cloth. Jake watched her approach with suspicion and confusion. Why was a princess tending to a prisoner? Why had she saved him from execution? She sat on the edge of the bed and reached for his bandages. Jake pulled away instinctively. She paused and looked at him with those strange eyes. She said that she would not hurt him. Her voice was gentle, but Jake had learned not to trust gentleness from enemies. She told him that his wounds needed proper care or they would become infected. She said that the healing magic could only do so much and the rest required traditional medicine. Jake considered refusing, but his body was in bad shape. He had cracked ribs and deep cuts and bruises that covered most of his torso. Reluctantly, he allowed her to check his bandages. Her hands were surprisingly gentle as she worked. She cleaned the wounds with practiced efficiency and applied medicines that smelled of herbs and something sweet. Jake studied her face as she worked. There was a sadness in her eyes that he had not noticed before, a weight that seemed too heavy for someone who should have everything. When she finished, she sat back and looked at him. She introduced herself as Princess Lyra of the Velthari Empire. She said that she had many questions for him. Jake said nothing and just watched her. Lyra asked him why he could understand their language. Jake had wondered the same thing, but he had no answer. She asked him why Corvash had not killed him. Jake definitely had no answer to that. She asked him where he learned to fight with such skill, that one Jake could answer, but he chose not to. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Lyra stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the city below and spoke without turning around. She told Jake that he was in her private wing of the palace. She said that her advisors were furious that she had claimed him. She said that by law, he now belonged to her as property, but she promised she would not treat him as a slave. Jake felt anger rise in his chest at the word property. He was not some object to be owned, but he was also smart enough to know that being owned by the princess was better than being dead. Lyra turned back to face him. She said that something about Jake was different from other humans. She said that Corvash had sensed it too. The dragon had never shown interest in humans before. Most dragons saw humans as little more than clever animals. But Corvash had looked at Jake with what Lyra called recognition, as if the dragon knew something about Jake that even Jake did not know. Over the next few days, Jake slowly recovered his strength. Lyra visited him often despite the protests of her attendants. One was a stern woman named Katie, who served as chief advisor. Katie made no secret of her hatred for humans. She told Lyra repeatedly that keeping Jake was dangerous and foolish. She said that the other nobles were already spreading rumors. Another frequent visitor was General Amy, who commanded the dragon riders. Amy was different from Katie. She watched Jake with curiosity rather than hatred. Sometimes Jake caught her studying the scars on his arms with an expression he could not read. One night, Lyra came to his room after dark. She looked troubled and tired. She sat in the chair by his bed and was quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked Jake about his childhood. Jake was surprised by the personal question. He asked why she wanted to know. Lyra said that she needed to understand something. She said that Jake had scars on his body that were unlike any battle wounds. She had seen them when treating his injuries. Old scars that formed patterns she recognized from ancient texts. Jake felt his blood run cold. He had never shown those scars to anyone. They were from an incident when he was 7 years old. An incident that military officials had told him to never speak about. An incident involving something that came from the sky and left him marked. Lyra leaned forward and her eyes were intense. She asked Jake if he had ever encountered a dragon before coming here. Jake wanted to lie, but something in her gaze made him tell the truth. He told her about the night when he was a child. The night a creature descended from the stars and landed in the forest near his home. The night he wandered into the woods and found something that should not have existed on Earth, a dragon. It had been smaller than Corvash, but still massive to a 7-year-old boy. Its scales had been deep blue with points of light like stars. It had looked at young Jake with ancient eyes. It had touched him with one claw, and pain had exploded through his body. Marks burned into his skin in patterns he did not understand. Then the dragon vanished and military soldiers arrived. They told Jake's family it had been an animal. Attack. They told Jake to never speak of what he really saw. Lyra listened to this story with growing excitement and fear. When Jake finished, she stood and paced the room. She muttered to herself in the Velthari language. Then she turned to Jake and said something that made no sense. She said that Jake bore the mark of Veilstrom. She said that Veilstrom was one of the ancient dragons from before the Great Separation. She said that Veilstrom had been sleeping for thousands of years. She asked why an ancient dragon would mark a human child. Jake had no answer. Lyra came closer and knelt beside the bed. She reached out slowly, and Jake let her take his hand. When their skin touched, something happened. Jake felt a surge of energy flow between them. He saw flashes of images that were not his memories. He saw Lyra as a child bonding with Corvash. He saw the threads of magic that connected her to the dragon, but he also saw something else. He saw threads reaching from Corvash toward him. He saw his own scars glowing with the same light as dragon magic. Lyra gasped and pulled her hand back. She stared at Jake with wonder and terror. She said that this should not be possible. She said that humans could not touch dragon magic, but Jake had just done exactly that. Outside the window, a roar echoed through the night. Corvash was calling from his perch on the palace spires. The dragon sounded agitated. Lyra ran to the window and looked out. Her face went pale. She turned to Jake and said they were under attack. The Kryn had come. The insectoid aliens that were enemies to both Velthari and humans. Alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Lyra told Jake to stay in the room where he would be safe. But Jake was already getting out of bed despite his injuries. He said he could fight. Lyra started to argue, but more roars filled the air. Not just Corvash now, but many dragons. The battle had begun, and Jake was not going to hide while others fought. The Kryn came like a swarm of nightmares from the dark spaces between stars. Their ships were organic things that pulsed with sickly green light. They descended on the palace in waves and released warriors that looked like insects merged with metal. Jake fought alongside Velthari soldiers. Despite his injuries, Lyra had given him a weapon and armor that adjusted to fit his human form. The armor felt alive against his skin and responded to his thoughts. He moved through the palace corridors, taking down Kryn warriors with efficiency that surprised even him. Something inside him had awakened during the attack. His body moved with speed and strength that should not have been possible for someone in his condition. The scars on his arms burned with silver fire. When Kryn blades struck him, the weapons shattered against his skin. General Amy saw this happen, and her eyes went wide with recognition. She fought her way to Jake's side, and together they defended a group of young Velthari who had been caught in the wrong place. Amy asked Jake if he knew what he was becoming. Jake said he did not understand. Amy said that she would explain later if they survived. The battle raged for hours. Dragons fought in the sky above while warriors clashed in the halls below. Corvash was a storm of fury ripping through Krynn ships with claws and fire. Lyra rode on the dragon back, directing the defense with skill born from years of training. But the Krynn kept coming. They were after something specific. Jake realized they were pushing toward the royal archives. He told Amy, and she swore in the Velthari language. She said the archives contained secrets that could not fall into Krynn hands. Jake and Amy raced toward the archives. They arrived just as Krynn warriors were breaking through the doors. The fight was brutal and close. Jake took wounds that should have killed him, but his body kept healing. Silver light poured from his blood and burned the Krynn that touched it. Finally, the last Krynn warrior fell. Amy collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Jake stood among the bodies and looked at his hands. They glowed with faint silver light that slowly faded. Amy told him that they needed to get him to the royal vault. She said that Queen Isabella needed to see what Jake had become. They made their way deeper into the archives past shelves of ancient books and scrolls. At the center was a chamber sealed with magic. Amy placed her hand on the door and it opened. Inside they found Queen Isabella and Lyra along with several nobles. Katie was there looking angry as always. Queen Isabella was a tall woman with silver hair like Lyra, but her eyes were gold instead of violet. She looked at Jake, and her expression was one of shock and fear. She asked Amy why she had brought the human here. Amy said that Jake needed to see the truth. She said that his blood had awakened during the battle. Queen Isabella closed her eyes and seemed to age before their eyes. She said that she had hoped this day would never come. Katie demanded to know what was happening. Queen Isabella walked to a pedestal where an ancient book lay open. She told them all to gather and listen. What she revealed changed everything. Jake thought he knew. The Velthari were not aliens from another world. They were human. Long ago in the distant past, humans had discovered dragon magic. A group called the First Riders learned to bond with dragons. The bond changed them over generations. Their bodies adapted to the magic. Their lifespans increased. Their appearance shifted. They became what the galaxy now knew as Velthari. But not all humans joined the First Riders. Some feared the changes and rejected dragon magic. Others were jealous of the power and wanted it for themselves. One group, led by a woman named Zara, tried to steal the magic through dark experiments. They created something twisted and terrible. They became the Krynn. The First Riders fought against Zara and her followers. The war nearly destroyed everything. In the end, the First Riders made a terrible choice. They separated the human race. Those who had bonded with dragons left Earth and settled new worlds. Those who had not bonded stayed behind. All memory of dragons was wiped from Earth history. The First Riders hid themselves across the galaxy. They became the Velthari and forgot their human origins. Only the royal family kept the true history. Only they remembered that humans and Velthari were the same species, separated by time and choice. Queen Isabella looked at Jake with sadness. She said that some human bloodlines carried dormant dragon magic. Families descended from the First Riders, who stayed on Earth. Jake was one of those descendants. The mark from Veilstrom had awakened what slept in his blood. That was why he could understand their language. That was why Corvash recognized him. That was why his wounds healed with dragon fire. Jake felt his world tilting. Everything he thought he knew about himself was wrong. Katie stood abruptly and pointed at Jake. She said this was exactly why humans were dangerous. She said that if word got out that Velthari were just modified humans, it would destroy their society. She said Jake needed to be eliminated before he could spread this knowledge. General Amy stepped between Katie and Jake. She said that Katie was wrong. Amy revealed that she was half human herself. Her mother had been human and her father Velthari. She said the old laws forbidding mixing of species were based on lies. The truth was that humans and Velthari could bond because they were the same. Lyra had been quiet through all of this. Now she spoke up. She said that the Kryn attack was not random. They had come for the archives because they knew about Jake Zara. The hive mother who led the Kryn was still alive after thousands of years. She remembered the first riders. She feared their return. If Jake truly carried the bloodline of the first riders, then he was a threat to everything Zara had built. The Kryn would not stop hunting him. They would follow him back to Earth if necessary. They would destroy his home world to eliminate the possibility of more awakened humans. Queen Isabella said there was only one way to protect both Earth and the Velthari Empire. Jake needed to complete what Veilstrom had started. He needed to fully awaken his dragon magic. He needed to become a true first rider, but the process was dangerous. Most who attempted it died. Even those with the bloodline often could not survive the transformation, and if Jake succeeded, he would no longer be fully human. He would become something in between, something new. Jake looked at all the faces watching him, Katie with hatred, Amy with hope, Queen Isabella with worry, and Lyra. Lyra watched him with violet eyes that held so much emotion, fear and hope, and something else. Something that made Jake's heart beat faster. He thought about Earth and the billions of humans who had no idea they were in danger. He thought about his squad who died protecting refugees. He thought about the choice the first riders had made so long ago. They had sacrificed their humanity to protect others. Could he do any less? Jake said he would do it. He would undergo the awakening. Katie protested loudly. She said humans could not be trusted with dragon magic. She said Jake would fail and die anyway. Queen Isabella silenced her with a look. She told Jake that the ritual required him to enter the dragon crucible, a place deep beneath the mountains where wild dragons lived. He would have to survive their judgment. He would have to prove himself worthy. If he succeeded, he would bond with a dragon. If he failed, he would be consumed by dragon fire. Lyra stepped forward and took Jake's hand. She said she would help him prepare. She said that she believed in him. Corvash roar echoed from outside. The dragon could sense what was happening. In the distance, answering roars came from the mountains. The wild dragons knew a candidate was coming. Jake looked at Lyra and made a silent promise. He would survive this. He would become what he needed to be, because now he had something worth fighting for. Not just Earth, not just humanity, but the possibility of a future where the species could be united again and maybe, just maybe, a future with Lyra. The journey to the Dragon Crucible took 3 days across mountains that touched the clouds. Lyra insisted on accompanying Jake, despite the protests from Katie and the other nobles. General Amy came as well, saying she would not let Jake face this alone. Corvash flew above them, keeping watch. The closer they got to the mountains, the more Jake felt something calling to him, a pull deep in his chest that grew stronger with each step. The scars on his arms glowed brighter at night. Lyra told him stories about the crucible as they traveled. She said it was where young Velthari went to bond with their first dragon, but most went at age 15 after years of training. Jake was going with barely any preparation. The ED success rate for adults attempting first bonding was less than 30%. For humans attempting it, the rate was 0 because no human had tried in 5,000 years. Amy added that Jake had one advantage. Veilstrom had already marked him. That meant at least one ancient dragon believed he could survive. On the second night, Katie appeared. She had followed them with a group of loyal soldiers. She stood before their campfire and made her final appeal. She begged Lyra to see reason. She said that even if Jake survived the bonding, he would upset the natural order. She said the Velthari had built their civilization on being superior to other species. If humans could bond with dragons, then what made the Velthari special? Lyra stood to face Katie. She said that fear of change was no excuse for cruelty. She said the Velthari had become arrogant and forgotten their origins. She said maybe it was time for their society to evolve. Katie's face twisted with anger. She said that Lyra was a fool, blinded by feelings for a human. She said the nobles would never accept this. She said there would be consequences. Then Katie did something that shocked everyone. She drew a blade and lunged at Jake. But Amy was faster. The general intercepted the attack and the two women fought. Katie's soldiers moved to help, but Corvash landed with a roar that shook the ground. The dragon presence stopped everyone in their tracks. In the brief distraction, Amy disarmed Katie. She held the advisor at sword point. Amy told Katie that she was under arrest for attempting to murder a guest under royal protection. Katie laughed bitterly. She said that Amy could not arrest her. She said she had powerful allies. She said this was far from over. Then Katie revealed something that made Lyra gasp. Katie said she had already sent word to the Kryn. She had told them where Jake would be. She had made a deal with Hive Mother Zara. If the Kryn killed Jake, then Katie's allies would help them access Velthari military secrets. Katie believed she was saving her people from contamination. She believed humans needed to be kept separate and weak. She believed the old ways were right. Before anyone could react, Katie activated a device hidden in her clothing. Energy exploded outward and everyone was thrown back. When Jake's vision cleared, Katie was gone. She had escaped using forbidden technology. Lyra was furious and heartbroken. Katie had been her trusted advisor since childhood. The betrayal cut deep, but there was no time to dwell on it. If Katie had told the Kryn where they were, then the enemy would come soon. They needed to reach the crucible immediately. The group traveled through the night. By dawn, they reached the entrance to the dragon crucible. It was a massive cave that descended into the heart of the mountain. Heat poured from the opening along with the smell of sulfur and something ancient. Lyra took Jake's hands and looked into his eyes. She told him to trust his instincts. She told him to remember that dragons respected courage above all else. She told him that she would be waiting for him when he emerged. If he emerged, Jake wanted to say something meaningful, but words seemed inadequate. Instead, he squeezed her hands and nodded. Then he turned and walked into the darkness. The descent took hours. The cave wound down and down through passages carved by dragon claws over millennia. Jake saw markings on the walls. Pictures of humans and dragons together, pictures of the first riders in their glory, pictures of the war that separated the species. The heat grew intense, sweat poured down Jake's face and his lungs burned with each breath. Finally, the passage opened into a vast cavern. The floor was molten rock that glowed red and orange. Pillars of stone rose from the lava like the bones of dead giants, and everywhere there were dragons, dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. They perched on the pillars and ledges. They varied in size from as small as horses to as large as buildings. Their scales were every color imaginable, red and gold and green and blue. Some had multiple heads. Some had wings covered in eyes. Some looked almost metallic. They all turned to look at Jake as he entered. The weight of their combined attention was crushing. Jake felt his knees weaken, but he forced himself to stand tall. He was human, and humans did not bow to anyone, not even dragons. One dragon descended from the heights. It was covered in crimson scales and smoke poured from its nostrils. It landed before Jake with a crash that shook the ground. The dragon leaned its massive head down until its eye was level with Jake. Then it spoke inside Jake's mind. It asked why a weak human dared enter the sacred place of dragons. Jake answered that he came to prove himself. The crimson dragon laughed. The sound was like boulders grinding together. It said that many had come with such claims. It said the crucible was littered with their bones. It asked what made Jake different from all the others who failed. Jake thought about his squad dying to protect refugees. He thought about Earth hanging in the balance. He thought about Lyra waiting above. He told the dragon that he had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. He told the dragon that his blood carried the mark of the first riders. He told the dragon that Veilstrom had chosen him. At the name Veilstrom, the entire cavern went silent. Every dragon suddenly focused on Jake with new intensity. The crimson dragon drew back. It asked if Jake truly bore the mark of the Star Wing. Jake pulled back his sleeve and showed the scars on his arms. They blazed with silver light in the heat of the cavern. The dragons began to roar and call to each other. The sound was deafening. Then something happened that no one expected. The molten rock at the center of the cavern began to move. It rose up like a fountain, but it was not lava. It was a dragon. The creature that emerged was larger than any Jake had seen. Its scales were midnight blue with points of light scattered across them like stars in the night sky. Its eyes held the depth of space itself. This was Veilstrom, the ancient dragon that had marked Jake as a child. The dragon that had slept for 5,000 years. Veilstrom looked at Jake and spoke with a voice that echoed in his soul. The dragon said that the time of separation had ended. The dragon said that the first riders would rise again. The dragon asked if Jake was ready to become the bridge between divided peoples. Jake said yes. Veilstrom lowered its massive head. The dragon told Jake to place his hand on its scales. Jake stepped forward on shaking legs. He reached out and touched the dragon fire exploded through his body. Not pain, but transformation. Every cell screamed as dragon magic rewrote his very being. Jake fell to his knees. He could feel himself changing, his human form fighting against the alien energy. He could die here. He could be consumed, or he could embrace it. Jake stopped fighting. He opened himself to the magic. He let it change him, and in that moment of surrender, he felt Veilstrom's mind merge with his own. They became one, not separate beings, but two parts of a whole. Jake screamed as wings of pure energy erupted from his back. His scars blazed like liquid silver. His eyes burned with starfire. When it was over, Jake stood on unsteady feet. He was no longer fully human, but he was no longer separate from dragons either. He had become something new. The first rider reborn, Veilstrom roared, and every dragon in the crucible answered. They would follow, they would fight, they would bring the divided species back together. But above, in the world of light, the Kryn were coming, and Katie had already begun her final betrayal. Jake emerged from the dragon crucible riding on Veilstrom, back with 50 wild dragons following behind. Lyra stared in wonder at the sight. Jake had changed. His eyes now held flecks of silver that glowed in the sunlight. His scars were visible even through his clothing as if they were part of his skin itself. Wings of energy flickered in and out of existence on his back. He was no longer completely human, but he was not Velthari either. He was something entirely new. A true first rider, reborn after 5,000 years. Lyra ran to him as Veilstrom landed. Jake slid down from the dragon back and nearly collapsed. Amy caught him before he fell. The transformation had taken everything from him, but there was no time to rest. Smoke rose from the direction of the palace. The Kryn had attacked during Jake's trial. Katie's betrayal had given them perfect timing. The enemy knew the defenses would be weakened with Lyra and Amy away. General Amy immediately began organizing the dragons for battle. Lyra climbed onto Corvash and prepared to lead the defense. But Jake stopped her. He said they needed to end this permanently. He said they needed to go after Hive Mother Zara herself. If Zara died, the Kryn would fracture. Their hive mind depended on her. Lyra argued that it was too dangerous. Zara hive world was deep in enemy territory. They would never survive. Jake said they had to try for Earth and for the Velthari Empire. For all the humans and dragons that had been separated for so long, Veilstrom agreed. The ancient dragon said it had waited 5,000 years for this moment. The time had come to finish what the first riders started. Amy volunteered to lead a strike team. A dozen of her best riders agreed to come. They would attack Zara Hive while the main forces defended the palace. It was a desperate plan, but it was their only chance. The journey to the Hive world took them through space aboard a captured Kryn ship. Jake felt sick the entire way. His body was still adapting to the transformation. Lyra stayed by his side and helped him through the worst of it. She told him about her childhood with Corvash. She told him her dreams for peace between all species. She told him that she believed in what he represented. A future without the old divisions. Jake listened and felt his resolve strengthen. When they reached the Hive world, it was worse than anyone imagined. The planet was covered in organic structures that pulsed with sickly light. Billions of Kryn lived there. The air itself was poison, but Veilstrom and the other dragons could protect their riders with magic. They descended through clouds of toxic gas. Kryn defenders swarmed to meet them. The battle was immediate and brutal. Dragons clashed with bioships. Riders fought Kryn warriors in the sky. Jake and Lyra pushed toward the central hive. That was where Zara would be. They fought their way through corridors of living flesh. The walls moved and breathed around them. Kryn came at them in waves, but Veilstrom burned them away. Corvash fought at their side. The two dragons moved in perfect synchronization. Jake could feel the bond between himself and Lyra growing stronger. Their minds touched across the link between their dragons. They moved as one. They fought as one. Finally, they reached the throne chamber. It was a massive cavity in the heart of the hive, and there sat Hive Mother Zara. She was enormous, part insect and part something else. Her body was covered in armor made from the bones of her victims. Her face still had traces of the human she once was that made her even more horrifying. Zara laughed when she saw them. She said that she had been expecting this. She said that Katie had told her Jake would come. She revealed that she had captured Queen Isabella during the attack on the palace. The queen hung in organic chains above Zara's throne. Isabella looked weak but alive. Zara offered a deal. She would release the queen if Jake surrendered. She would leave Earth alone. She would end the war. All Jake had to do was give himself to her. She wanted to study him. She wanted to learn how he had bonded with Veilstrom. She wanted to recreate the first riders under her control. Jake looked at Lyra, then at his dragon, then at Queen Isabella. He stepped forward. Lyra grabbed his arm and begged him not to, but Jake had a plan. He had learned something during his transformation. Something about the nature of dragon bonds. Zara was not actually Kryn. She was a twisted version of a first rider. She had tried to force the dragon bond through dark experiments. That was what created the Kryn species. But forced bonds could be broken. Jake reached out with his new senses. He felt the connections between Zara and her hive. Millions of threads of corrupted magic, all of them flowing back to Zara Heart. He told Veilstrom what he intended. The dragon understood immediately. It was insanely dangerous. It might kill both of them, but it would work. Jake placed his hand on Veilstrom's scales. Together they channeled pure dragon magic, not the corrupted version that Zara used, the original magic of the first riders. They sent it out like a wave across all the threads connecting Zara to her hive. The magic burned through the corruption. It purified the bonds. It gave the Kryn back their free will. Zara screamed as she felt her control slipping. She lunged at Jake with blades extended. But Lyra and Corvash intercepted her. The princess and her dragon fought with fury born from seeing Jake sacrifice himself. Jake fell to his knees as the magic drained from him. His body could not sustain this level of power. He was burning out. Dying Lyra saw this and made a choice. She joined the magic flow. She added her bond with Corvash to Jake, connection with Veilstrom. The four of them became one network. The power doubled. The purification wave swept across the entire planet. Every Kryn felt their minds become their own for the first time. Millions of voices that had been forced to obey suddenly had choice. Many chose to stop fighting. Some chose to flee. Others turned on Zara for what she had done to them. Zara tried to reassert control, but it was too late. The bonds were broken. She was alone. In her rage and desperation, she attacked with everything she had, but she was fighting four opponents now: Jake and Veilstrom, Lyra and Corvash. Together they were unstoppable. The battle destroyed the throne chamber. Queen Isabella fell, but Amy arrived in time to catch her. The strike team had fought their way to the center. They helped evacuate the Queen. Zara made one final attempt. She tried to detonate a weapon that would destroy the entire planet. But Jake was faster. With the last of his strength, he severed the connection between Zara and the weapon. Then Veilstrom closed its jaws around Zara. Dragon, fire consumed her. This time, there would be no regeneration. Hive Mother Zara died after 5,000 years of causing pain. The Hive world fell silent across the galaxy. Kryn ships stopped attacking. Without Zara control, they could finally make their own choices. Many surrendered. Many asked for help. They had been prisoners for so long. The war ended not with total victory, but with understanding. Jake collapsed as soon as it was over. His body had been pushed beyond its limits. Lyra caught him before he hit the ground. She held him and begged him not to die. Not after everything. Not after they had finally found each other. Jake opened his eyes one more time. He saw Lyra crying. He saw Corvash and Veilstrom watching over them. He felt the bond between all four of them, permanent and unbreakable. He whispered that he was not going anywhere. Then darkness took him. When Jake woke 3 weeks later, he was back in the palace. Lyra sat beside his bed, holding his hand. She had not left his side the entire time. His body had survived, but it was forever changed. He was neither human nor Velthari. He was both, and neither a bridge between species. Over the following months, the galaxy changed Earth, and the Velthari Empire formed a formal alliance. The truth about their shared origins became public. Some resisted the knowledge. Others embraced it. Katie and her conspirators were arrested. Many Kryn asked for asylum and were granted it. They began the long process of building their own civilization, free from Zara control. General Amy became the first ambassador between Earth and the Velthari worlds. She worked to establish programs where humans could train as dragon riders. The first volunteers arrived 6 months after the war ended. Young humans from Earth who dreamed of bonding with dragons, Jake and Lyra trained them together. They taught the ancient ways to a new generation. The two had become inseparable. Their bond through their dragons had created a connection deeper than words. One evening they stood on the palace balcony watching the sunset. Lyra leaned against Jake's shoulder. She asked if he ever regretted the choice he made. Jake watched a young human girl laugh as a dragon nuzzled her hand. He thought about his squad. He thought about Earth safe from Kryn invasion. He thought about Lyra and everything they had built together. He said he had no regrets. Corvash snorted smoke from nearby. The dragon rumbled that destiny rarely asked permission. Veilstrom added that the first riders had returned. The dragon said the stars would remember this age. As the twin suns set, Jake and Lyra knew their story was just beginning. The galaxy had been forever changed, and they would face whatever came next together, bound by choice, by magic, and by love that transcended all boundaries.